Hi, everyone, and welcome to this video from the Texas Commission on the Arts. We've created this series of videos to help students and teachers prepare for the Poetry Out Loud competition. My name is Derek Mudd, and I'm a program administrator at the Texas Commission on the Arts, or TCA. TCA is the state agency for arts in Texas, and we conduct the state Poetry Out Loud competition that feeds into the national competition. Today's session is called Traveling Through the Poem, and our presenter today is Tomás Morín. Tomás Morin's newest volume of poetry, Machete, is forthcoming from Knopf in 2021. He's the author of the collections Patient Zero and A Larger Country, winner of the APR Honickman Prize, and runner-up for the PEN Joyce Osterweil Award. His memoir, Let Me Count the Ways, will be published in 2022 by University of Nebraska Press as part of the American Live series. He translated Pablo Neruda's The Heights of Machu Picchu, as well as the libretto Pancho Via from a Safe Distance, and with Marie L'Espérance, co-edited Coming Close, 40 essays on Philip Levine. His work has appeared in Slate, Threepenny Review, Boulevard Poetry, New England Review, American Poetry Review, Blackbird, and Narrative. He teaches at Rice University here in Texas and in the low-residency MFA in Writing program at Vermont College of Fine Arts. Tomas, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Thanks. I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Tomas. I previously judged the Texas Poetry Out Loud state finals competition, and that was my first experience with it, and I was absolutely blown away by the quality of work and the time and attention that the students put into those poems. It was absolutely fantastic. And one thing that really stood out to me as someone who reads and performs their work often out on the road, on book tour and whatnot, is how much careful attention the students paid to the journey that is in the poem, and not just reading the poems or not just reciting them. It was always clear to me that the students who had really gotten to the emotional kernel of the poem and understood what that was, those were the students who were able to communicate that just, I know, seemingly effortlessly, but I know there's a lot of work that goes behind that. And one of the things that I have started doing in terms of performing my own work, because I don't recite my poems. I have a dear friend of mine, a poet, who he does recite all of his poems, and he recites his because his method of composition is to draft a poem in his head while he's walking. So by the time he gets down to type up that first draft, it already exists mostly in his head. So when that poem is finished and he reads it at some point in the future, the poem already lives in his body because it's tied to that walking, and because the sounds already live in his body, the meaning is already there as well. It's carried through as well. And that's something that I don't think it comes natural to many of us. It certainly didn't come natural to me. And since I don't have a good memory, like I would never been able as a high school student to participate in the Poetry Out Loud contest. I just don't have the memory for it. It's not it's not a tool I have. So my challenge has been trying to figure out how can I approximate in performing my work that kind of an experience while actually holding a book in front of me. And I think this will be helpful, like this process will be helpful to teachers and students, because it can help you, I think it'll be like a sort of good, important marker on the way to memorizing the poems and reciting them and performing them. One of the things I do is I will take my poems and type them up fresh, but without any lines, and just type the sentences out separately. When I first started performing my work, I would always pause at the end of a line. And it created um, such a wooden performance, a performance that felt disconnected from the emotional life of the poem, because the emotions that I was communicating in the poems, in the sentences that the poem contains, would push past the ends of the lines. So it was unnatural. I was inserting unnatural pauses into the poems that weren't actually there, but I felt like that was what a poet was supposed to sound like, because I had heard other poets other poets read that way, who had published many books. And but then I came across readings by poets like Philip Levine, um, uh, uh, Natalie Diaz, Gwendolyn Brooks, William Stafford. And I realized that they were reading their poems in a way that was dramatic and dynamic. And I was not thinking about the lines when I watched videos and heard audio of them reading their poems, performing their poems. And I thought, how can I do that? So I listened to a lot of them. I listened to a lot of audio and watched a lot of video while I had the poem, like I had it in front of me, and I was sort of taking cues from that. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the tools that I developed was when I really wanted to, I know this will sound odd, like, why would I have to disassemble a poem, remove all the lines, and just have the sentences floating on a page in order to get to the emotional truth of it if I'm the one who wrote it? Like, shouldn't I know, shouldn't I know what the emotional truth is? But one of the sort of secrets that I know I didn't learn when I was a high school student studying poetry was that the writer doesn't always know everything that gets into their work. There's certainly the things that we intend to put in there, that's in there, but also there are things that sneak in, from the backs of our minds, from the backs of our hearts, that sneak into poems and novels and short stories that we're not even aware of until maybe years later. There's a truth that's speaking through us and to us. But disassembling them helped me engage with that sort of mystery. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to read to you this poem entitled "Traveling Through the Dark" by William Stafford. It's a famous, very famous poem for a lot of good reasons. It was famous when I was a student already, and then just talk a little bit about it, and the performative aspect of it. Traveling through the dark. Traveling through the dark, I found a deer dead on the edge of the Wilson River Road. It is usually best to roll them into the canyon. That road is narrow. To swerve might make more dead. By glow of the taillight, I stumbled back of the car and stood by the heap. A doe, a recent killing. She had stiffened already, almost cold. I dragged her off. She was large in the belly. My fingers touching her side brought me the reason. Her side was warm. Her fawn lay there waiting, alive, still, never to be born. Beside that mountain road, I hesitated. The car aimed ahead its lowered parking lights. Under the hood purred the steady engine. I stood in the glare of the warm exhaust turning red. Around our group, I could hear the wilderness listen. I thought hard for us all, my only swerving, then pushed her over the edge into the river. If I was, pausing at the end of every line of this poem, it would absolutely destroy the emotional impact of it. But beyond that, William Stafford does this thing that the poet Frank Bedard, I once heard him say that if you're not familiar with his work, in particular his early poems, he uses a lot of white space, but also like all caps. He'll all cap a certain letter, a certain word. And he was once asked why he does that, and he said to him, using punctuation and using type, using all caps and all those sorts of tricks of the keyboard, is his way to try to musically score the poem in the way that he hears it in his head. So his goal is to use punctuation and use white space to score a poem as if it were a piece of music, so that when the reader reads it, they will, quote unquote, play it in the same way that he hears it in his head. And I think William Stafford is doing that in a way as well. There's a way in which the poem requires and requests that I slow down when I get to the middle of it. Like it is usually best to roll them into the canyon. There's a colon there, then that road is narrow, semicolon, to swerve might make more dead. Like period. Like that moment at the end of the first stanza is those half stops before you get to that full stop might make more dead. That's like he's pumping the brakes. He's literally pumping the brakes, but also trying to tell us that this is a moment where we need to linger in the way that the speaker is lingering. So then you have that by glow of the tail light, and stood by the heap, comma, a doe, comma, a recent killing. That is, I don't think I've ever heard this poem. I don't think anyone recited it during or performed it during the state finals, but I would imagine that this poem would take longer to recite and perform than it would take to read it, which I think is like absolutely essential and right, because you're finding out. This is that wonderful thing called verisimilitude, right? You're there with him in the red gauzy light, of the car, and you're seeing the doe, and you're discovering everything as it's being discovered on the page. And the same thing, for the audience, is like, what's going to happen? And when you get to that moment, her side was warm, her fawn lay there waiting. That is in the absolute middle of the poem. And I don't think that's an accident. That's the that's the moment where everyone's breath is catching, like what's going to happen. And then the poem starts picking up speed from that point forward. Beside that mountain road, I hesitated, period, stanza break. The car aimed ahead its lowered parking lights. under the hood purred the steady engine. And now the engine of the poem, the journey, the emotional pit stop, as it were, that is in this poem, would start picking up. We start moving on from there until we get to that end. Because the poem is 4 quatrains, and the last stanza is a couplet. I thought hard for us all, my only swerving, then pushed her over the edge into the river. Yeah, it's and I think like it's all there, like all of the in the way that a play contains stage directions, like the directions are there with the poem as to how it should be performed, and also how we should feel. How we should feel. We should first be surprised, and then shocked, and then in a state of, at the middle of the poem, a state of like, what happens now? What is going to happen? Is he going to save it? And then in the end, just it. I feel like for me as a reader, I've probably read the poem 100 times by now, at least in my lifetime since I first read it. I still, when I get to the end, I feel lost. I feel because I don't know what I would do. I'm left in that the poem leaves me in that uneasy space of would I call someone? What just I don't know. But yeah, so this is all to say, if I were going to try to recite this poem and perform it in a competition, I would start by pulling those sentences out, just so that I could feel it and see it and hear it more clearly. What is the emotional journey of this poem? And that's something I would do, and I would just type them out. Yeah, and probably practice reading the poem to someone who didn't know it. Practice reciting it. Yeah, I think it's easy to, and it's hard sometimes to teach what the emotional journey is in a poem, because we can get caught up in symbolism and alliteration and all the sort of the crafty, tricky things, the fun things, and forget that poems are written by flesh and blood people who have experienced something very powerful, whether that's a sad thing or a happy thing. But these poems written by flesh and blood people are meant for flesh and blood people. And I think it's an easy thing to lose sight of. So sometimes breaking down the apparatus of the poem is really, it's really important as a way to get to that. I don't know how we're doing on time. How's that?
I think we're great. Thank you so much. And
You're
thanks
very
to
welcome.
all. Yeah. We appreciate having you here and doing this. And thanks to all of you for watching this video. We hope you'll watch the rest of the videos of this series. If you or your school are interested in participating in the next Poetry Out Loud competition, please contact us at poetryoutloud@arts.texas.gov. Tomas, give you an opportunity to say goodbye, and any final words for the audience?
Yeah, just again, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this and to talk about poems and poetry. And it's always a good day when I can talk about poetry, especially with young people. Thank you.
And thank you for watching this video. We hope you will watch the rest of the videos of this series. If you or your school are interested in participating in the next Poetry Out Loud competition, please contact us at poetryoutloud@arts.texas.gov. Have a great day.